You are fat. 3 little words with the power to change 2 lives. At the time that those words were hurled at me, it was a beautiful summer day, and I weighed 256 pounds. And those words came out of the mouth of one of my very best friends, Mika Brzezinski. Some of you know her because she's the co-host of Morning Joe on MSNBC. Those words were among the most painful I have ever had to hear in my life. But that harsh-sounding message eventually led me to the dawn of my new day, when I realized that being overweight was not just a personal failure, not even a personal failing, and not just my own problem. I realized that I was part of a trend that has been building in this country, a trend that has threatened to rob us of our health and our wealth. I'm not going to lie. Those words were like a slap in the face. And Mika and I were so close. We've been like sisters. We were both news anchors in Connecticut, and we had supported each other through all the ups and downs of our careers. We'd shared just about everything 2 friends could share, except for one. Neither one of us had ever felt that we could talk about our struggles and our battles with food. We'd been best of friends for 15 years. And in those 15 years, while we were both on TV, I had gained 100 pounds. Mika said that she wanted to talk to me about it, but that talking about my weight had always felt taboo to her, a bridge too far, until that day in the middle of a family outing on a small boat on Long Island Sound. I'd given her the opening when I said to her, you know, Mika, when you come over, it's so hard to know what to cook for you and your family, because every morning I watch you on TV and you talk about the obesity crisis in America, which at the time I didn't really believe even existed. And I said, you're always telling people what to eat, what not to eat. You're picking on all the guys on the set. I said, you've become the food police. So when you're coming over, I'm paralyzed. I don't know what I'm going to cook, what you'll be accepting to eat. And then I said to her, I said, you know what? I said, what do you know about being overweight? You talk about it all the time. I said, you don't get it. I said, being thin is so easy for you. Look how thin you are. And that's when she jumped on me and she said, Diane, she said, you think it's easy for me to stay thin like this? Because if you do, you know nothing about the hell that I go through every single day. She said, I am tortured by food. In fact, I'm obsessed by food. Well, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I really couldn't believe it. I'd known this woman for 15 years. She had always seemed the perfect model of fitness and health to me. So I was stunned. But then I was even more stunned when she turned to me and she said, and by the way, Diane, I said you're fat. You're not just fat, you're obese. Well, that really hit me. At that point, I was thinking, I'm just going to toss her over the side of the boat. She's skinny, I can probably do it with one hand. But then she said to me, as I was really feeling like this, she said, your weight is going to kill you, and I can't sit by and watch that happen. We have to do something about that. And then she started talking about her own issue with food, which I had never known in all these years that we've been so close. She talked about how she felt addicted to food, to processed food, food that's laced with sugar and salt and fat. By the way, the food that has helped make our country the fattest on earth. She talked about a lifetime of binging and purging and compulsive eating and compulsive exercising to try to lose the calories that she'd just taken in. She talked about eating an entire pizza and then living on lettuce and water for the rest of the week. And I could relate. I had binged, I had overeaten, and then I had dieted drastically, trying to conform my body to the image expected of a woman on television. And believe me, I have tried every diet in the book, and some that aren't in the books. I've been on Weight Watchers. I've done Jenny Craig. I've done Nutrisystem. I've done OptiFast. I've done the Scarsdale diet. I've done the South Beach diet. I've done the cabbage soup diet, the candy diet, the grapefruit diet. Trust me, I could go on. There are more, but I won't. I was such a great dieter that I had dieted my way all the way up to 256 pounds. Good job. Meanwhile, her disordered eating had her weighing a super skinny 116, and the 2 of us are the same height. So here she was at 116, and here I was at 256, and neither of us were healthy. So later on in the afternoon, I said to her, Mika, you know, you ought to write a book. Because I was thinking, if people knew the truth about her struggles with food, then those on-air discussions that she had all the time about what to eat and what not to eat might not sound so much like preaching from some skinny know-it-all. So she thought about that. About a week later, she calls me and she said, I got us a book deal. I said, us? I said, I didn't say you should get us a book project. I said, you should write a book. So she said to me, hey, she said, I'm not going to go out there and bare my soul about all this crazy stuff that I do unless you get in it with me. And then she made me a deal. She said, in the several months that we would have to work on the book together, I had to promise to lose at least 50 pounds. And she said, and you're going to use your portion of the book advance money to do that, whatever it takes, nutritionist, bariatric surgery, personal trainer, whatever it would take. That's how I want you to spend the money so that at the end of this, you're healthy. Well, I have to tell you, every fiber in my body resisted the idea. I did not want to share my battle with my weight. To me, that must be how people who are alcoholics feel about talking about their alcoholism. But then I thought, how can I turn her down? I mean, come on, haven't you watched those commercials and seen somebody who's being paid by Jenny Craig and said, oh yeah, well, if they paid me, I could lose weight, right? So here's someone who essentially was saying, I'm going to pay you. So I thought, she's throwing me a lifeline. She is giving me a chance to take back what fat has taken away from my life. So I decided to take a leap, and I said yes. And then I said to her, you have to agree to gain some weight. It's going to take professional counseling, but we have to work on your eating disorders. And she agreed. So over the course of writing the book, we got experts to work with the two of us, and her behavior changed, and she was able to gain 10 pounds. As for me, I lost 65 pounds. And I decided after doing some research, thank you, that I wanted to do it what I would call the old-fashioned way, through diet and exercise. But not a diet, not another one of those diets, but a whole new way of thinking about food, a whole new way of eating, and a whole new way of approaching my life. And I decided in the very beginning I needed a complete break, because after all those diets and after all the reports you read every day in the news about what's healthy, what's not healthy, I didn't know what to eat at that point. So I decided to join a medical weight loss program at a hospital. And it started out a 12-week program, and you had a visit with a doctor every week and a visit with a nutritionist, and it was considered their alternative to bariatric surgery. And you're in a class for those 12 weeks. So here I was at 256 pounds in a class with 30 people, and I was the smallest person in the room. And I was also one of 3 people out of 30 who, when we had the trainer about diabetes come in and talk to the class one week, she said, who's pre-diabetic or diabetic? And everyone except the 3 of us raised their hands. And I thought to myself, that's my future if I don't change this and make a dramatic change in my life. I realized at that point this was no longer about my looks or the size dress I wanted to fit into. This was about my life and how I would go forward living it. I had been suffering from a bad hip. It had led me to a lifestyle that was more and more sedentary, and believe me, it showed. I was so out of shape and so ashamed of my body and my condition. I was ashamed. So I found a personal trainer. Now, we couldn't have looked more different. Here I am, middle-aged white lady from the suburbs, and here he is, an African who escaped his native Ghana because at the age of 6, he was forced into becoming a child soldier. And he had the bravery to get away. So here we are. I'm talking to him about all my issues, and he looks at me and he says, put your burden down. He said, that's my burden to carry now. All you have to do is show up, and we'll get you there. And we did. I showed up, and it worked. I lost 65 pounds. Now, it's been 3 years. I've gained a little of the weight back. But I realize now that that's a story that's familiar to a lot of you. I also realize that my struggle to maintain a healthy weight is ongoing. And I also know that being overweight is not the result of a character flaw, which is what I always used to think about. You know, we're learning so much about obesity and biology these days. There's new research coming out all the time. And so the book that Mika and I ultimately wrote, which we called Obsessed, America's Food Addiction and My Own, is really much more than the story of 2 friends. It's really about our nation. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about this today, because it's way more than our story. It's really a call for us to have a real dialogue about food and about weight, about disordered eating and the threats they pose to this country. And we have to, and here's why. The Centers for Disease Control tells us 2 out of every 3 Americans right now is either overweight or obese. More than 12 million children are obese. That's 3 times as many as just in the 1980s. If we don't change course, half of all Americans are going to be obese in 15 years. And in fact, a report that just came out in September showed that the obesity rate for African American adults is already 48%. That's almost 1 out of 2 people. And on the topic of disordered eating, half of high school girls and a third of boys report trying to lose weight using diet pills, vomiting, laxatives, or fasting, and then binge eating. We already know about the health conditions. We know that arthritis, hypertension, heart disease, they are among many of the chronic conditions that are exacerbated by obesity. In my lifetime, the percentage of Americans with diabetes has increased 7-fold. And we now know that obesity means an increased risk of cancer. And there's other consequences for people who are obese, including discrimination. The effect on the pocketbook alone is worth watching. Obese people earn less on the job. A Yukon Rudd Center survey for Glamour magazine, a popular women's magazine, asked 2,000 women to envision a stranger who was overweight and then choose a few words to describe her. And here were the words they chose: slow, undisciplined, sloppy, and lazy. And here's the kicker. Even the overweight women use those words about other overweight women. It's no way to live. So what do we do about obesity and food obsession in this country? Well, first thing we need to do is recognize and talk about it. That's our start. And then it's time to stop blaming and shaming ourselves. And yes, we're each responsible for what we eat, for our own behaviors, our own decisions. But we don't make those decisions in a vacuum. We live in a nation that makes eating hard to control. We live in a food carnival. So this is not just about willpower, it's not just about discipline, it's not just about push yourself back from the table. Something larger is going on in our society. Some of it is the kind of food we consume. Some of it is the media bombarding us with food advertising 24/7. In addition, everything about our modern society that makes it modern also makes it obesogenic, right? Convenient, abundant, inexpensive food, work that requires no physical labor, communities where we drive and we don't walk. So what we have going on is a crisis of many dimensions. It's a health crisis. The next generation, they tell us, may not live as long as their parents if this continues. It's an economic crisis. The cost of treating conditions related to obesity now costs this nation $500 million every single day. That alone could bankrupt us. And it's an employer's crisis because it affects worker productivity and absenteeism. And it's even a national security crisis. According to a group of top military leaders who have united to try to fight childhood obesity, they say 1 out of every 4 young Americans is what they call too fat to fight. So they can't even get into the military. So whose fault is it that America's getting fatter by the year? Is it all about personal responsibility, because that's what the food industry wants you to believe? Or has processed food been deliberately engineered to make us crave it? Think about the foods we eat, the ones that I said are ultra-processed, foods that are packed with sugar, salt, and fat. The foods that we as a society have ingested in massive amounts in the last 40 years, which, by the way, happens to coincide with the rise in obesity in this country. The ugly truth is that millions of Americans are hooked on foods that stimulate the body's internal pleasure system. They give us that feeling of reward that calls us back for more. It's a biological response, and the food makers know this. They actually have what they call the bliss point. They know just how much sugar, salt, and fat will set off the pleasure centers in your brain, the same areas that light up in an MRI if they give you cocaine. And a study that was just released this summer shows that food craving activates different parts of the brain in obese and normal weight patients, so some people are more prone to this than others. When we wrote this book 3 years ago, we were told there's no such thing as food addiction. But every day there's more and more evidence coming out suggesting that there is. So I say to you, we need to take this on. We need to talk freely and without judgment about these fierce and fearsome issues, about food, about fat, and about body image. We need to have a no-holds-barred conversation with our friends, with our family, in our schools, in our kitchens, with Congress, and with the food industry to help us all find ways to tackle one of the biggest problems that's standing between us and a healthier America. We need to push this subject out of the closet and put it on the table. Only then are we all going to see the dawn of a brand new day. Thank you.